lights and sirens, yeah, it's time to go, no time to defund us. You should know that we're not perfect, we're human, we're flawed. Just save us some grace for the sake of us all. We're holding that thin blue line, 'cause that's what we do. We don't do it for the glory, we do it for you.
Hello, Vax Choice and Clout Hub community. Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of In the Lion's Den, hosted by Dr. Bill Lionberger. How are you doing today, Dr. Bill?
Fantastic, Melissa. Good afternoon. It's nice to see the sun shining and the weather warming up after the sort of Midwestern storm that blew through. So it's nice to see some bright sunshine.
Yes, I agree. I'm ready for the cold weather to be over already. But the good news is today we've got an excellent show lined up. We have our favorite reoccurring guest, Mary Fanning, who is an investigative journalist and is the executive producer and the host of the National Security Hour. She is a co-author of multiple best-selling books and holds an honorary rank of colonel for her work and service to America. And we also have a new guest on today, one that you may not be familiar with from our show. And if you aren't, he is Peter Brimelow. He is a journalist, author, and longtime critic of U.S. immigration policy. He's born in England and educated at the University of Sussex and Stafford's Graduate School of Business. He built a distinguished career in financial journalism with Barron's Fortune and Forbes, and later served as a senior editor at the National Review. He is the author of Alien Nation and the founder of VDare.com. Today, he continues his work at peterbrimelow.com. So if you're interested in following on some of his work, you can find it there. And so I'm excited to see what we can learn from our guest today.
Fantastic, Melissa. So today's show is named U.S. Immigration from Crisis to Insurrection. And we're going to get right into it. So with that, I'd like to bring on our special guests today, Peter Brimelow and Mary Fanning.
Excellent. I will be in the background enjoying the show, and I'll be back at the end for questions.
Welcome to you both. So we find ourselves again, right, in the middle of insurrection crises that they want to see happen for what reason, and it's really all about this immigration that was created, and I think it goes way back, right, Peter? I mean, some of this goes back to 1965.
Thanks for having me on, Dr. Bill. Yes, in the middle of the 20th century, there was like a 40-year pause where there was no immigration at all because of the 1924 cutoff that had been legislated. In 1965, that was reversed and the gates were opened. And it's called the Hart-Celler Act. And at the same time, quite abruptly, the southern borders collapsed. And there's been enormous legal immigration since then. But of course, it's never been as bad as it was under Joe Biden, who just absolutely deliberately and systematically encouraged as many illegal immigrants to come in as possible. Maybe 10, 12 million, we just don't know. He was basically electing a new people. The Democrats believe that if they get third world people, and they will vote Democratic, and that seems to be basically true.
You would think that also there's a whole bunch of other things that follow on to that, crashing the system, using up the finances, stealing the money, taking the jobs. I mean, the list is endless, voting for the candidates, all of the bad things that, shouldn't be happening when you take a system that needs a certain amount of finite balance to function, and then you just literally tip the scale and wipe off the map some of that balance, right?
Yeah, I mean, the terrible thing about this great immigration influx that's happened over the last 60 years now is that, both parties were involved in it. The Democrats want cheap votes, but the Republicans, or at least the Chamber of Commerce Republicans, want cheap labor. And they still want cheap labor. Even as we speak now, they're making a renewed effort to go back to amnesty, which is what they tried to get through under George W. Bush. They don't seem to care at all about the impact on the on the country, or even on the Republican Party's prospects, because this is obviously suicidal for Republicans, and yet, particularly the Bush dynasty were fanatically determined to do this, to amnesty illegals into the country.
Mary, question: this whole thought of Trump bringing on the Insurrection Act, which I firmly believe he's well within his rights, one, to do, and two, we now have enough going on that we could press the case there in Minnesota, and it seems to be sort of on hold. Do you have any insight on your thoughts on this, how that might play out?
Well, we never know exactly what Donald Trump is up to until the whole plan is revealed. But it's imperative to understand, those who have ever studied torts understand negligence. And in negligence, in the law, there's something called proximate cause. So proximate cause refers to the idea that, but for this particular action, this other action would not have occurred. So when we're talking about proximate cause, and we're talking about Minneapolis, you have to consider that Governor Tim Walz was verbally and vocally, repeatedly encouraging Democrats to use violence to interfere with the ICE agents. Now, when you're looking at this riots and everything else that they're looking to get going, and that they in fact are getting underway, keep in mind that you have Tim Walz encouraging this. And at the same time, you have to put it in the context of what has been going on in this country. And as Joe Biden brought in all these illegals, and they weren't just, people who just happened to not be illegal, but they were bringing their families and they were dying to become Americans. You have to understand it in the context of a very certain Rachel Morin, Molly Tibbetts, Kate Steinle, Sarah Root, Laken Riley. You have to understand this in the context of all the women in this country that have been raped and murdered, and rape and murders like we have never seen before. A 12-year-old girl raped to death. Molly Tibbetts, it's too vile to even say the things that happened to these people. But understand, none of this would have happened except for Joe Biden's open borders. Then you have to go back in time and see Joe Biden on record saying that they're breeding out white in the country, and that Joe Biden admits to this. He was working with Soros when they went into South Africa. You understand Soros's Coudenhove-Kalergi plan, breeding out white, making sure that you're getting rid of white Christians in the United States of America. When you put it into that context, then you have a very different view of who these Democrats are and what they're doing to this country. Not only what they're doing here, look across the globe and look at some of what they've been doing to Europe. And it's truly breathtakingly evil.
It looks like it's their opening salvo, really, of testing their very organized systems to bring in these insurrectionists, pay them off, organize them, track people, and interfere every way they can and put themselves in harm's way, which is very dangerous, but we just kind of, I think a little bit of that underbelly just got exposed with the app, right? Wasn't the app exposed, and how they were coordinating this stuff?
They're not only coordinating it, but this is all part of a plan. They are attempting to overthrow the country. They're taking out those who are the legal citizenry, replacing them, but then they're looking to go into a surveillance state. And at that point, you've lost all of the benefits of the U.S. Constitution. And we've seen them do this so many other places. Ireland, England, where they take away gun rights, etc. And then they treat the people as though they're their slave class.
Peter, one of the things that appears in their playbook is we have a big problem over here. They have a big problem with the Somali, right, and all the money that's being stolen, where it went, and who's involved. And now they're tracking it. Now I think the president just signed an order bringing in a collection of agencies that can begin to work up that trail and track down the people that have been instigating that stuff. But with the sort of insurrection and all of the consternation that they push out there, is it like a smokescreen to the other bigger problems, do you think?
I think that it's quite obvious the Democrats simply intend to elect new people. And the reason why these problems have started in Minneapolis is because the local governments in Minneapolis, Minnesota, refuse to cooperate with ICE. ICE puts a hold on when illegal aliens are discovered in prisons and jails and so on. ICE puts a hold on them and tries to pick them up out of the jail. But in Minnesota, they won't allow this. They release them off the streets, no matter how bad they are as criminals. And that's why ICE has got to hunt them down on the streets. But this doesn't happen in Texas or Florida. The illegal criminal illegals are automatically turned over to ICE, and they deport. They're constantly deporting them. So this has been provoked really by the Democrats, the Democratic establishment in Minnesota, and you see it also in New York, and we're going to see it in Virginia very soon. They absolutely systematically don't want illegals to be removed under any circumstances. All this stuff about how rough ICE is at picking these people up and it is all nonsense. They don't care about that. They just don't want that. They don't really care about that. What they care about is keeping these people in the country. And that's for two reasons. One is they think three reasons. One is they think they will ultimately be amnested, or they think their children who are born here, of course, under the current misinterpretation of the law, are American citizens. Or thirdly, just by being in the country, illegals are counted in the census. And that means in a state like California, where there's probably over 1 million illegals, more than that, California gets more congressional districts. And it has greater influence over the country because the census is counting illegals. And you get these, what they call rotten boroughs, where they're actually relatively small numbers of voters, but they're representing hundreds of thousands of people. And the Democrats think that's just great. It weights the country towards the blue states.
There's a question about the illegal immigration that's taken place, and it's like an uphill slog trying to get back. And I know that their numbers are way ahead of where they've been before in terms of capture and remove, but we're fighting an uphill battle with the time that Trump's got on the docket right now. And then we have legal immigration, right? That's also working against that number.
Right. All through the Trump period. Well, in Trump's first year, about 1 million legal immigrants came in. 90% of them caught. They've not made any attempt to get the Congress to reduce that flow. Although, it's obviously going to shift the ethnic balance of the country very quickly as well. They're trying to reduce it by administrative methods, but then they've not proposed. What they should propose, of course, is an immigration moratorium for the next 60 years. And there's a bill in Congress by Chip Roy from Texas proposing that. But the Congressional Republicans are extremely frightened to move. One thing about Dr. Bill, I was going to say one thing about this million legal immigrants that's come in. It really puts in perspective and makes it all the more remarkable Trump's achievement in getting the foreign-born population to fall. I mean, the key issue here is not actually deportation of illegals; it's whether they just leave under their own steam. That's exactly what happened the last time there was a big illegal immigration crisis in the 1950s. President Eisenhower solved it in just a few months with his Operation Wetback, and about 1.5 million people moved out of the country. But only about 200,000 to 300,000 were actually deported. The others just got the message and left. And that's obviously what's happening now. The foreign-born population has fallen by about something like 2.5 million. But that's the net foreign-born population. When you realize that there's been 1 million legal immigrants coming into the country too, that means that the foreign-born population has actually fallen by about 3.5 million, which is truly remarkable for the first year. And I think it justifies in my mind what Trump is doing in Minnesota, because it does send a message. I mean, if you know anybody, I'm sure you do, who actually hire illegals, they'll tell you that the illegals all over the country are just terrified at the moment. They're afraid that if they go out, they might be picked up by ICE, although ICE doesn't have the manpower to pick up very many of them, but they don't want to take the risk. So I think we'll continue to see these illegals leaving, as long as the Democrats don't break Trump's will.
Well, one of the things they have to do is get rid of birthright citizenship, also go after the employers of all these illegals, then begin to debank them, make sure that it's punitive to hire illegals. And Peter is so right. Many of the illegals are not coming out of their homes right now. They are very afraid to come out on the street. And if you are too afraid to go to work, and then your employers are paying fines for hiring you, then you lose your banking abilities, then many people will be leaving on their own.
And of course, especially, Mary, if they would tax remittances, and
Oh, yeah.
a lot of people send money back to the countries they came from. In fact, in some of these countries, some of these Central American countries, become a major factor in their GDP. Where if they're taxed, then it just becomes economically less attractive to be here. The trouble is the banking industry doesn't want to do that because it makes money on the wire transactions. But that's typical. I mean, the entire corporate class is to blame for this.
The lack of patriotism by bankers or corporations is breathtaking, and that they are not standing up for this country is really quite disturbing. At the same time, when you've got affirmative action and you're hiring anyone but a U.S. Citizen, look at the numbers of what they've been doing for years to white Christian men, refusing to hire, access to law schools, good universities, our Ivy Leagues. This has been a plan that's been underway for a very long time. And it is finally that the American people are waking up. And that's due to cognitive warfare. The more we get people to understand what's taking place in this country, the more they will no longer put up with it. Looking at the Somali pirates just in Minnesota, who have taken 80 million of Americans' taxpayer dollars. Can you imagine that you bring people like this in, and then we find out some of the connections to trafficking, etc., and that they're using our tax dollars for that. And then you see how George Soros was laundering the USAID monies into these NGOs to destroy this country. And in a different day, I do not think Americans would have sat still for so long for this.
Well, of course, they just didn't know, did they? I mean, it simply wasn't reported. You have to ask yourself, where's the mainstream media been all these years?
Well, that's pretty clear.
Right, exactly.
Which is where they're still at, right?
I think that's right. There was, I mean, I was in the media, mainstream media for a long time, writing for Forbes and Fortune and so on. I even was on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal for a while, incredibly. Their reaction to the internet has not been to say, oh, we've got to get our act together and be more honest and that kind of thing. It's just they've just doubled down and become more and more doctrinaire and more totalitarian in what they allow in and what they keep out.
You know, one of the questions that comes to mind is, you know, where's the media been in Minnesota? Because many people have been raising the flag and, you know, begging the question of this Somali fraud, and it's just been not followed, swept under the rug, you know. So the local media obviously is either complicit in some form or fashion. And when you talk to the Minnesotans, you know, outside of Minneapolis and around the country there, they come forward and say, hey, this is not what we believe. This is not what we support. We're not supporting this stuff. And so it comes back to people like Tim Walz and Jacob Fry, who basically are key drivers in this and probably key culprits, right, Mary?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. They encourage the violence. This is proximate cause.
Maybe you can weigh in, Peter.
Well, of course, that's completely right. And what interests me, Mary was saying these numbers are figures in the millions, but they're actually in the billions. It's simply utterly staggering what these home care agencies have been able to siphon off. And I have to believe it's gone to the Democratic Party. It's not just these criminal Africans. I think the Democratic establishment has been personally benefited from this. I mean, to draw it back for a moment, I mean, it's astonishing to me how much money both the Clintons and the Obamas seem to have accumulated since they got out of the presidency. How did that happen? Obama was an undistinguished lawyer, and as far as I know, he's not been in litigation working as a lawyer since then. But why is he so wealthy? It's very puzzling.
Well, and he's a complete fraud. There's no such thing as the president of the law review. You're either the editor or you're not.
Oh, you're talking about his resume? Yes, that's right.
Yes, I'm talking about his legal career of sorts.
Right.
But Obama's weighing in right now, telling people to stand up against this. This is someone who's trying to take down. When he talked about the transformation of the country, he was talking about its destruction, and his hands are involved in this. Along with, I refer to this as Bolshevik 2.0, because they're here to destroy the country, and that's what they're doing.
I think one of the problems that immigration has exacerbated in this country is the division between the parties. I mean, if you look at the Republican Party, it's fundamentally a white party, or I should say an American party, what would have been regarded as American prior to the 1965 Immigration Act. Over 90% of its voters are white. But if you look at the Democrats, it's very different. Their base is fundamentally made up of people of color, homosexuals, and Jews. The what you might call normal white party section of the presidential vote is well below 50%, and the party is dominated by these one form or other minority groups, and they are out of touch with the rest of the country, but they're extremely emotional, extremely fanatical. I mean, the idea that the Democrats are going to go into the 2026 midterms running on a platform abolishing ICE, it makes no sense to anybody except if you happen to be, an editorial board member of the New York Times or the Washington Post or something. They live in this bubble and they don't communicate with the rest of the country, and they genuinely think that's going to be popular. And it will be popular with parts of their base, but I don't think that's going to be enough to win the country.
Well, they're so ignorant that their commonality is that they hate the country. That's what they hold in common.
And they don't belong to the country, of course. I mean, Ilhan Omar has made it very clear she's a Somali. She's not an American.
Yes, a woman who came in with nothing, married to her brother and another person, and now has $30 million in her pocket. Those are your tax dollars, folks.
So a thought that comes to mind is, the media has been complicit in not covering this stuff. These folks, are running their sort of smoke screen, gaslighting the country, letting everybody think that, ICE is in there, pummeling people just for no good reason when they're actually trying to defend themselves and do their job, working in law enforcement. That's what they're trying to do. I've seen an escalation, though, in ICE's tactics. They're shifting now. It's time to shift. When you get the numbers that begin to be overwhelming and they're so organized now that they're breaking the laws in all kinds of ways, I've noticed that they're bringing in some higher tech equipment. I noticed some MRAD, LRAD type of, acoustic device, stuff like that. I'm thinking, I think it's time that we began to use a little more technology to, it's going to take more than pepper spray to deal with this, right?
Not only they can use skunk bombs like Israel does to disperse when you have protesters like this, but keep in mind something else. The lamestream, media, the Smith-Munt lying media that puts forth these stories, they're not covering the fact that Alex Preddy had gotten into a conflict with ICE the week before and had interfered once before and got in there and had ended up with broken ribs. They're not putting the man in context, and it's tragic that he ended up dead. And had Fry and Walls not been encouraging this, it would not have happened. If they had put their own police on the job. Thank you. Sorry, Peter.
And if they would just allow ICE to go into the prisons and jails and pick up the criminal illegally, as like they do in Texas and Florida, they wouldn't be in the streets at all. So I mean, they are precipitating this crisis, the Democrat elite. But I mean, there's a very serious problem that's emerged here, which is that the entire legal system in Minnesota appears to be corrupt. I mean, as it is in areas like DC and so on, they can't get we see this in Los Angeles too. They can't get indictments against these against these demonstrators, because the grand juries won't indict them, and the judge and the prosecutors won't even attempt to get them indicted. And the Chief Justice of Minnesota, who is nominally Republican, is totally on the side of the immigrants. This insurrection goes right into the judicial system. In effect, Minnesota has seceded from the Union. And that's why I think the answer is really the Insurrection Act. Go in there and seize and arrest Waltz and Fry and try them for treason. Because that's what
And
this
stop
is.
this now.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
stop it now before it gets much worse. Keith Allison has a long history. They know who he is, what he is. Another convert to Islam. We're turning over our country to people who don't believe in this way of life. They're not part of our culture. They're setting up a country within a country, and they're just the $80 billion that we know about that they stole should be enough to.
Did you see, by the way, that Dr. Oz was in California yesterday, revealing another huge fraud, healthcare fraud in Los Angeles? Well, this one is run by Russians and Armenians. So this appears to be absolutely epidemic. And it's quite astonishing that it took Elon Musk and Doge to start to figure it out.
It is, and it's galling when the rest of us that work for a living think of all the taxpayer dollars that we put forward.
So basically, the Americans are paying, are subsidizing their own dispossession through the tax system.
We're paying for the privilege of our own demise.
Right.
You know, and it appears to me that we can't wait for what appears to me as a bench versus badge showdown, right? If the president doesn't give the mandate to the team, start taking these guys out like we did, the Venezuelan president, and we went and took charge over in Iran and made things happen. We've got to literally have a take charge attitude, because if you wait for a bench versus badge or judicial immunization and the polarized judges that aren't going to vote for what you need and continue to release these folks, and you're just going to be on a revolving hoop and not get anywhere. So don't we have to change up the game?
The trouble is, that the Republican Party, the Congressional Republicans, are utter cowards. They were. You can see that they're just panicking already over these couple of killings in Minnesota. When I was running VDare.com, we every month used to run a list of black and white murders, and also white and black murders. Every month there are 30 to 50 black and white murders in this country. Some of them utterly atrocious. And there's never more than 4 or 5 white and black murders, often in self-defense. And that to me is a attention. And the death of 2 communists in Minnesota is frankly irrelevant. I don't even regard it as a tragedy. I think it's a necessary process that the country's got to go through to get this immigration situation under control.
I've seen also another push from the walls.
They interfered in the law.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Those should have been the expectations that is exactly what would have happened.
Right. That's why I don't even bother watching these videos. These people already put themselves in harm's way. I don't want to see. I don't want to go on minutely, exquisitely litigate whether the guy fired the gun at the right moment, whether he should have waited. For one thing, most people have never been in that kind of a violent confrontation. I don't want to second guess people who have to make split-second decisions about firing. My position is, if they've got themselves in that situation, it really doesn't matter whether the cop should have waited longer or not. It's the victim's fault.
100%. Yeah, I mean, you put yourself in that situation. You knowingly, willfully went there to create a problem as much as you could get away with, and you cross the line in all kinds of ways, including breaking the law. And you're not an expert at it most of the time, and that's where you get yourself in hot water. Yeah, I'm going to run over this cop and get out of here. That's not going to work usually most of the time. So, I've also seen.
Well, of course, the trouble is it actually does work a lot of the time, because, for example, until quite recently, it was quite common for if a cop got into a fight with somebody and the guy started to run away, the cop should shoot him as he ran away. And you can see why he would do that in the heat of the moment. And it was just regarded as a cost of policing criminals. But over the years, the courts have gradually whittled away about that. Until now we get an atrocity like the Michael Slater case in South Carolina, where he's jailed for life and never not allowed to see his children and all this kind of thing, because he got into a fight with somebody. A black guy tried to steal his weapon and then broke away and ran away, and Slater shot him while he was running away. Something which would have been illegal, quite legal 15 years ago, and yet he was lynched.
Right.
It's everything that's taken place since the day Obama walked in the door. The whole lie about Trayvon Martin. Everything that took place with Trayvon was false. The fact that Pam Bondi went and stood on the side of Trayvon when they knew the truth of the matter gives real pause about Pam Bondi and what she will do. If people want to understand, as Peter was referencing what was taking place with the black on white crime, read the book White Girl Bleed a Lot and look at the statistics.
Flaherty, yes, that's Colin Flaherty. He used to write for us. That's right. He very unfortunately died of leukemia too young, but the book was excellent. But on the other hand, Mary, he at one point on YouTube, he had a very popular YouTube channel that went into this kind of thing, and he was making something like $20,000 a month off the YouTube channel, and then YouTube banned him because they didn't want that information getting out. We were banned, of course, in 2020 as part of the big tech's campaign to defeat Donald Trump in the 2020 election. It's extremely difficult to get this kind of stuff out if you
absolutely. We at the American Report, I was banned, and when Elon found out about it, he went in and caught James Baker was making sure that all of our work was shadow banned and you couldn't see it. And he exposed him in Twitter Drop 8 that he was covering up all my work on Hammer and Scorecard, etc. But one of the things I'd like to point out that I think is so important is under Obama, he lied about what took place in Benghazi. And had he told the truth, he could never have given those billions of dollars to Iran as part of that JCPOA deal. That's important because you had Obama giving the enemy billions of dollars while hiding that it was Soleimani who killed the 4 Americans, Soleimani and the Quds Force. And you're hearing Trump refer to that today. Most Americans don't understand it, though.
I must say, it really is impressed the number of fronts that Trump is fighting on. He's fighting the Venezuelans, and he's fighting the Iranians, and he's redesigning the White House ballroom, and he's taking over the Kennedy Center. It's simply staggering how much energy he has.
And perhaps backing our dollar properly and taking down the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor a reserve.
You mentioned that it's literally comes back to, I remember all the lawfare against Trump, right? I mean, every kind of way. And he's what defeated almost every one of those lawsuits and the ways that they tried to take him down.
Well,
you a target, right, Peter, of lawfare with the Letitia James.
Yeah.
Right?
Trump is still embroiled in those lawsuits, it's utterly scandalous what they did to him. But of course, it's utterly scandalous what she did to us. I mean, she just hit us with scores of subpoenas, and we were a 501c3 charity. We were registered in New York, and that enabled us to just subpoena us to death. And the amazing thing, and we're suspended now, which is why I started my own site, peterbrimelow.com. VDARE is still there. It's got 25 years of articles about the immigration disaster that you can access, but we can't. We're not updating it right now. We can't afford to. Well, I should let you carry on, Bill.
No, I just thought it was important because it's an example of the lawfare. Anybody that's making.
I remember just going to say, incredibly, a journalist we know found one of Letitia James's operatives, Rick Sawyer, who's leading the charge against us, actually spoke to the Anti-Defamation League, a conference called Taking Hate to Court, and he said that hate speech, that's us. If we criticize immigration, that's hate speech, is protected by the First Amendment. But there are ways around that. If it's a charity in your jurisdiction as an attorney general, you can just subpoena them to death, bash them to death through lawfare, pile costs onto them until they go out of business. That's exactly what he's done to us. But we've been totally unable to get the federal courts to pay attention to that. We're trying again now.
Well, you have to understand, what they're censoring, who they're going after, is the very data that they most fear coming to light, because it puts them, the left, the traitor class, in context. When you have the likes of Letitia James doing what she did, or Jack Smith, these people are out to hide their own illegal behaviors, that which they will hang for.
Well, the problem is that they're actually able to hide it. I mean, it turns out that the entire FBI and the Justice Department and so on just shot through with Democratic operatives who will not apply the law against Democrats. Letitia James, it turns out, has a 40-year record of mortgage fraud. But up to now, the DOJ has been unable to indict her for it because the grand juries and first of all, the DOJ permanent officials didn't want to do it, and secondly, when the Trump appointee tried to do it, the courts and the grand juries just completely resistant to indict her, even though the evidence is very clear.
Well, and Jack Smith was not properly appointed. Imagine this man going and raiding the one-time president's home. You've never seen anything like this in America before.
Right.
You know,
No, they did think that was going to discredit him in Americans' eyes, and it in fact seems to have done the exact opposite. So we have to hope that there's more common sense in America than there is in Washington, D.C. and New York City.
But the Smith-Mundt media, which is, Obama put through Smith-Mundt modernization of 2012, making it legal to run psyops and to lie to the American people. They are not hearing the truth, except from very few corners. And Jack Smith, when you put him in context, you see his wife is working for Michelle Obama. You see his mother-in-law used to work for George Soros. Only when you start seeing the connectivity of who these people are, do you begin to understand what you're looking at.
And yet, if you watched him being asked the questions, he was not able to really answer the questions about taking the oath of office. I mean, talk about, I got you. I mean, he couldn't even begin to articulate, couldn't remember taking the oath, right? Which kind of indicated that he wasn't even legitimate all the way along because, we forgot to do that, right? Or we didn't do it intentionally, whatever the reason. But it has, I think, far-reaching implications. But you got to get these judges to, do their job. And I don't know what's next for him. What do you think is next for him?
Well, for starters, there must be consequences. If there are no consequences, this illegal behavior, criminal behavior will continue. And then the rule of law does not exist in this country. And we're the Soviet America.
Well, it certainly doesn't exist in New York State. I mean, Jonathan Turley, who's a First Amendment specialist who writes for Real Clear Politics, actually refers to New York as the law that land forgot. The land that law forgot. I'm sorry. It doesn't just apply to us. I mean, they've mugged the banks for various things and so on. I mean, they're completely lawless society. They're muggers, is what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Peter,
and they've taken all of our government. They've taken the IRS and they use it as a cudgel to go after their opposition.
Right.
This is so. I mean,
basically, we're reverting to a third world society.
Yeah,
we're moving in the direction of a third world society. This is what you expect to see in third world societies, and there's a reason for that. It's very largely done by third world people. Which is why it's so important that America remains predominantly a white society. Basically, the only people who believe in law, objective law, are white people.
I couldn't agree more. And Peter, when you look at the 45 points of communism, they could have put the 46 and said, bring in ignorant, stupid people, elevate them to the top, make sure that they're festering hate for white people and put them in charge. Because that's what they've done. That's what Obama did in this country. That's what Joe Biden did in this country. Joe Biden, I don't know that I know his history. He's an evil man. Was he really running anything, or was it the auto pen and the communists behind him?
There's obviously, it reminds me very much really of looking at his monarchies. You know what was going on there. In a monarchy, you quite often get a situation where the king or queen is simply too old to function. Well, that's okay because the courtiers function for them. And it can go on for a long time. That's quite clear what's happened with Biden. The White House has been run by a cabal of leftists, and they were quite happy to continue doing that. But one thing, one of the weaknesses that the Democrats have is that they really do believe their own propaganda. I mean, right now, for example, they really do believe that Trump is unleashing a fascist coup in Minnesota, whereas in fact the truth is exactly the opposite. It's a communist coup run by the Democrats. But when you look at what they did with Biden, they really did convince themselves that he was fine. He was going to be able to go on a debate, and there wouldn't be any issues. So they have a tendency to screw themselves up, basically, and we have to hope that that's what's happening now. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Kent State, in spite of my accent. Is anybody else here old enough to remember Kent State?
I know of Kent State and Bill Ayers and what took place there.
Well,
Really
the thing
quite
is,
stunning.
People don't realize is that the shootings at Kent State, which was entirely the fault of the Vietnam protesters, they were throwing rocks at our men. What do you expect? Got overwhelming support in the country. And Nixon won the subsequent election. He carried all but one state. And also, anti-Vietnam protests immediately calmed down, immediately cooled down, because people were just at a very basic level afraid. They realized that in fact, things could happen if they went out and threw rocks at policemen. And frankly, that's what we need here.
Well, and that's what happened in Chicago.
I don't know. Yes, indeed. I don't know that the Republican, even people around Trump, and so have the nerve to do it.
No. In Chicago with Bill Ayers and the Weathermen, and when they started attacking, and they were getting away with it until Mayor Daley came out and said, shoot to kill.
The Democrat convention, that's right. It was quite remarkable because the media assumed that this was fantastic, that this was fantastic and unpopular, putting these rioters down, but it turned out it wasn't at all unpopular.
And now you have a governor in Illinois, Pritzker, who is encouraging more violence and standing with Walz and those who are encouraging another revolution in America.
Right. Of course, in retrospect, of course, I wish Trump had declared the Insurrection Act in 2020 against Black Lives Matter. He should have done that because I think it just demoralized his own supporters that he didn't. But the whole upper class in the US was going through some kind of emotional crisis, some kind of a nervous breakdown at that point. And I think Trump is more alert to that now. And the people around him are more alert to that. I don't think they're going to be as intimidated now as they were during Black Lives Matter, and also with the January 6th thing, which was obviously a hoax, the way it was handled.
January 6th was election interference. The whole thing was a Fedsurrection. It was a setup to make sure that they could never get to the Electoral College vote. Beyond that, we now know, because we captured it on tape, that there was no tear gas. That was all a big lie.
That the protests were using tear gas.
There was no protest. There was no tear gas on the protesters. The whole thing was kabuki theater.
Peter, I wanted to segue for a moment. You mentioned that Trump is fighting on multiple fronts, right? I think his ability to fight on multiple fronts is enhanced in this second term because, he has the benefit of the first one. He learned a lot. Then he had that whole time in between to sort out better enemies versus people that are on his side to get the truth and justice done. And now he's really got an agenda, put America first on the global stage, right? What are we seeing? We're seeing also withdrawal from the U.S., the United Nations agencies, withdrawal from the UN, human rights, pull out from climate change. And then what do we see trying to fill the void? Gavin Newsom, right? We just saw that. But your thoughts?
I think that they have learned a lot. And one of the things they've learned is not to depend on the mainstream media. I mean, if you look at the January 6th thing, it really was very disturbing. I mean, it's obvious if you were watching it, and I didn't go, but I was watching from here in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, about 2 hours away. It was obviously not what they were saying it was. For one thing, these people weren't armed. It wasn't an insurrection in any shape or form. But reading the accounts that have subsequently published, a lot of people in the White House were panicked by the mainstream media. I think that's less likely the case now. I think they've learned not to take the media narrative at face value.
Your thoughts, Mary?
Yeah, they attempted to delegitimize everything that takes place in this country, and it's no longer playing. I think that people are aware that they're attempting to run a revolution to take down the country, and it's becoming more clear that this is taking place in order to protect the criminal activity that they've been running for years, the theft of the billions, if not trillions of dollars. We now know that Ukraine was used as a laundromat, running monies through there. And, that all has to be tracked down. It has to be prosecuted. So all those who are attempting to destabilize the United States, Trump has to understand, and I do believe that he does, that there has to be consequences. And I think that people are catching on to this. And one of the reasons that we know that they are is after his first term and after they stole the 2020 election and that data has come forward, they know that the people stood up and they voted for Trump in large numbers. So people are not quite as fooled as those in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere think.
If you had Trump on the phone right now, with all that's going on, with what's going on in Minnesota, and Waltz and Fry and this whole insurrection truly that seems to be taking place, what would you advise him? What would you say to Trump?
Do you want to go first, Mary?
Yeah, the first thing I do is I agree with Peter, and it's on all these illegals in our country. Punitive for any who hire, debank them, make it impossible to live here, and they will leave on their own, just like the numbers that have already departed on their own. And also consequences for those that, like the Somali pirates who stole 80 billion that we already know about. There has to be financial consequences. There has to be real consequences, not only to Somalia and the people that helped to perpetrate this crime, but people have to go to prison.
Yes, I guess my first suggestion to him would be to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota and make an example of the people behind this. Round them up and put them in jails. And that includes Waltz and Governor Waltz and Mayor Fry, whatever his name is. More generally, I'd say announce an immigration moratorium. We actually do technically have an immigration moratorium now because there are quite a large number of, or to some extent, because there are quite a large number of countries that they've decided through executive action they're not going to process visa applications from. But it should be enacted into law. There should be an immigration pause in immigration that lasts at least as long as this great surge has lasted. Kicked in '68, so it's been going now for almost 60 years. Abolish birthright citizenship. There are masses of illegals in the country, but if they have children, they are going to enter the political community anyway because their children are treated as American citizens quite wrongly. So it should be abolished. I would also be in favor of extending the length of time you've got to be here to be a citizen. It's currently 5 years. The Japanese have just increased theirs from 5 to 10 years because they're concerned about their immigration problems, which are minuscule, minute, infinitesimally small compared to what the US has got. Just to throw out a really esoteric, something that isn't often talked about. I think Reynolds versus Sims should be reversed. That was it was a Warren Court decision, which said they call it the one man, one vote decision. But what it meant was that a state like Minnesota, both its Senate and its lower house have got to be elected on a one man, one vote principle. And what that means is that the region, the rural areas of the state are completely deprived of control. They become colonies of this big city, Minneapolis, and that's so in many big states, Illinois, Maryland, to some extent Pennsylvania. There used to be that there were balancing mechanisms at the state Senate level, which meant that the rural areas, which are actually the white areas, can protect themselves. Well, they were abolished by the Supreme Court. Well, it should be unabolished, because you see what happens is you get a situation where the left is in complete control of a state like Minnesota, even though there's a lot of Republican voters in Minnesota. Well, then they get control to dominate the institutions and the judicial system and so on, and gradually impose a communist state there, which is what they're doing.
And that took place because of things like affirmative action. I think that needs to be abolished as well. We have the scales of justice in America. It's not the scales of melanin. So get rid of affirmative action, get foreigners out of our universities, stop the monies going to universities that promote these illegal schemes, and take back the country.
And what are they going to do when you starve their money? I mean, what do they have for gainful employment? Zero. What do they have for skill sets? Who knows? Somali piracy. I mean, how are they going to make it? They're not going to make it without stealing it from Medicare and others. Pretty soon they're going to be, looking for handouts somewhere else, because that's the only way they've actually been able to make it, is with these, handouts from the federal government, from the states, and stealing the money in which way they could. I wanted to bring on Melissa. She's been sitting behind the scenes here listening to our great show today, and she may have a question or two for us. Hello, Melissa.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. So a couple questions that the audience may have are, are there any laws being put in place to prevent another president from basically undoing all of this work and opening the floodgates like Biden did?
The short answer to that is not yet. There are a number of laws that have been proposed in Congress to, for example, enact into statute reform a lot of the regulations that Trump has enacted through executive action. But the Republican Congress is not acting on them. And so it's that's a very disturbing thing. But there is good legislation out there, but Speaker Johnson and the majority leader in the Senate are not taking it up.
Well, Peter's exactly right. One of the things that the American people can do are start calling repeatedly every day, stand shoulder to shoulder with other Americans, call your congressman, tell them what you want them to do in no uncertain terms. Call the White House, send emails. If you have a bunch of old geezer friends, tell them this is their job. This is the time that they come and stand up for America by making these calls, sending these emails, and not to stop until we win.
I recommend the Pause Act, which is something proposed by Chip Roy from Texas, which is an immigration moratorium. And I think if Trump were to get behind that, it would be extremely popular.
Well, and Chip is very important in the hearings that he just came, and is the idea that they started spying on those who they were concerned that had information that work in Congress, spying on their telephone calls. We've never seen anything like this in this country before. There must be consequences.
What was going on to Biden was what happened in Eastern Europe after World War II. The Soviets didn't immediately get complete control of those societies, but they spent about 4 or 5 years doing it until they finally able to abolish all the parties and have a communist party dictatorship. And it was done very often through the courts. They just litigate against their enemies because they controlled the courts, and they were able to basically lawfare them into silence. So the Biden regime was extremely alarmed what it was doing. It was a totalitarian regime. But
they knew exactly what they were doing.
Melissa, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you have more questions.
One final question, Melissa, on time.
Well, and this one I would like your input on as well, Dr. Bill, since you're a police officer. We're seeing with these ICE raids, like the whole reason it's a problem is people know where they're at because they have these groups where they say, oh, ICE is in my neighborhood, ICE is coming here. They basically tattle where ICE is going to be so that the mobs can go after them. I see it in my local area as well. Is that something that could be made a crime because it kind of shows an intent of harm or at least malice to where they're wanting to thwart or what's the word? Basically bother the ICE agents from doing their job. Do you think that that should be a crime? Why or why not?
Well, yeah, it's already obstruction. But it's not something though that the ICE agents are used to on that level. They get parts and pieces of it here and there, but the level of organization and obstruction is at a level that's probably almost never been seen. Certainly not there. And so, yeah, they're breaking the law in multiple ways. And I think that the guys in charge over there are trying to figure out the best ways to, one, not fan the flames and try to calm this down. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to take this thing head on and deal with it.
It's the job of the Minneapolis police, of course. They should be doing that.
And then who's running that, right? What puppet is the chief of police over there? Because he's not working for the general Minnesotan. He's working for that administration, and that's not a good thing.
Who's paying the most?
Yeah.
So was he paid off? That's another question. What are these people? Are they being paid for their illegal behavior? And so they do, ICE Watch in particular, there have to be indictments there.
Yeah. You get an example of them to shut them down. Well, we're reaching the end of our show today. I wanted to thank both of our esteemed guests, Peter and Mary, for amazing insights for today's show, U.S. Immigration from Crisis to Insurrection. We really got into it. It's really relevant. It's current, and these things have to be looked at. And like Mary said, you've got to take action where you can. And if it's calling your legislators and it's calling, to try to impact and make change, then you're also part of the wheel that helps to get it done. I wanted to have Peter, if you would, maybe list. You've written a book, right? Give some of the information on how people can reach you, contact you, and what your book is about.
Well, the easiest thing to do is just to type in peterbrimelow.com and it will take you to my website, personal website, which is actually a Substack, and where it's what I'm trying to salvage from the record of VDARE, the material that we had there and over the last 25 years. I have a book. I wrote a book, but it's a long. It's. I wish I could. I was allowed to update it, but I can't get the mainstream publishers to do it. It's called Alien Nation: Common Sense About America's Immigration Disaster, and it was published in '95. It flowed out of a cover story I wrote for National Review in '92, and that's still available in Kindle. So those are the two. And VDARE.com, as I said, is still online and it's still searchable. And there's a ton of stuff, for example, birthright citizenship. We wrote our first article denouncing birthright citizenship, I think in 2000. So we've been at this quite a long time.
Well, thank you, Peter, again, for coming on to the show. Look forward to future opportunities. Mary, as usual, and always, thank you for your great sort of global insight and instincts and thoughts. And thank everybody for tuning in to In the Lion's Den today. Take care.
Blue lights and sirens, yeah, it's time to go. No time to defund us. You should know that we're not perfect. We're human, we're flawed. Just say to some grace for the sake of us all.